What is up, guys? My name is Steve. Thank you for stopping by my channel. I'm just an American guy on a journey to discover my British and Irish ancestry. Today we're going to be reacting to what does the House of Lords really do? I previously watched a video on the British Parliament, and I believe that's the first time I'd actually heard about the House of Lords. But, that video really didn't go into too much detail about who they were or what they do. So hopefully this video will do a good job on kind of explaining, who they are and what the House of Lords does. So I believe that the House of Lords is an unelected body of the Parliament, if I'm not mistaken. But other than that, I get the impression that, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, one is kind of like our Senate in America and one's like our House, sort of. But I know there's many differences between the two, I'm sure. But that's just kind of the impression I get. But guys, let's go ahead and check this out.
The LDR Explains video. In this one, we're going to explain the House of Lords, because it's been in the news a fair bit recently. As we discussed in our video earlier this week, the Lords attempted to amend Johnson's Brexit bill, which somewhat upset the Tories. But it's not the only reason that the Lords have been in the news recently. A couple of days ago, Conservative Minister James Cleverly confirmed that the government has been thinking about moving the House of Lords to York when Parliament starts renovations in 2015. And last week, Rebecca Long-Bailey, one of the front-runners in the Labour leadership election, said that she'd replace the Lords with an elected Senate. This idea, or variations of it, had been floated in the past. Nigel Farage was always a fan of it when he was running UKIP, and Nick Clegg attempted something similar while he was in coalition.
Okay, so my first impression so far is that, based off what they're saying here, the House of Lords is more like America's version of the Senate. And the House of Commons is more of like what we would consider the House of Representatives, which kind of makes sense because I know that the House of Commons is, those people are elected. And so that definitely makes sense.
So in this video, we're going to try and explain why the House of Lords has always been controversial with leading figures from all the main parties, as well as what the Lords actually does and who the Lords are. Before we do though, this topic was recently voted for by our patrons, who said they wanted a whole series of videos about the House of Lords. If you want to say in the videos we make in the future, then you can sign up to be one of our patrons now. There's a link to that in the description. So, let's get going. What is the House of Lords? Well, technically, it's the upper chamber of government, and its full official title is the Right Honourable, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in Parliament assembled.
The Right Honourable, the Lords Spiritual and Temporal of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in Parliament. Wow, that's a mouthful. Okay.
But for obvious reasons, no one ever calls it that. There are currently 794 Lords, though unlike the Commons, there's no fixed number, so this is subject to change.
Wow!
Of these 794, 244 are Conservatives, 180 are Labour, 92 are Lib Dem, and 242 are non-affiliated, independent, or crossbenchers.
So what do you say, 794? Is that the number? Wow! That number is not set in stone, though, but the House of Commons seems like that number is set in stone. Wow, so I don't know, is that comparative to our Senate? Our Senate has 100 representatives, 2 from each state. I wonder how these are. Let's check this out.
There are also 26 bishops in the House, known as Lords Spiritual, and 10 representatives of other smaller parties. Of the 794, 92 are hereditary peers, making the UK the only country in the world, apart from Lesotho, to have hereditary peers. That might sound bad, but until the House of Lords Reform Act in 1999, there were some 600 hereditary peers.
Wow.
So I guess at least it's progress. On that note, according to the House of Lords Reform Act of 2014, Lords are removed if they don't turn up for a whole parliamentary session, or if they commit a crime. Technically, according to the House of Lords Expulsion and Suspension Act of 2015, Lords can also be removed by vote if the other Lords decide on it, but this has never happened yet. The Lords are technically appointed by the Queen, although usually on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. There are 2 main times that the Prime Minister gets to recommend laws: at the end of Parliament, in what's known as the Dissolution Honours, or when the Prime Minister resigns, for the Prime Minister's Resignation Honours. Since the House of Lords Reform Act of 1999, any recommendations have to be approved by an independent body, called the House of Lords Appointments Commission. The Commission also makes occasional independent recommendations to the Queen for non-political appointments. Because Parliament was dissolved recently, we're actually due a dissolution honours list quite soon. And, controversially, we know that Johnson has not recommended John Burke over a peerage, breaking the convention that the Speaker of the House of Commons gets a peerage upon retiring. So that's who's in the Lords, but what do they actually do? Well, as is the upper chamber in Parliament, its main function is to scrutinise, amend and approve legislation. Once a bill is finished in the Commons, it goes to the Lords, where they can take a look over it. Often, because the Lords have more time on their hands than MPs, and because no party has a majority in the House, the Lords are able to scrutinise legislation a bit more impartially and effectively. Also, Lords are often awarded their peerages thanks to proficiency and expertise in a particular field. So if a bill is on a specific topic, say the European Union, chances are that there'll be a few Lords available who are experts on that particular topic. So what happens if the Lords disagree with a bill that comes through the Commons? Well, in the 19th century, the Lords could just flat out refuse to assent the bill, and that means it would never receive royal assent and never pass into law. However, the Parliament Act of 1911 changed that, so that even if the Lords opposed a bill, they could only delay it for a maximum of 2 years, and couldn't delay money bills relating to taxation or public expenditure. Then, going further, the Parliament Act of 1949 shortened the Lords' maximum delay to 1 year, with some key exceptions. This meant that legally, the Lords can't block most bills, even if they disagree with them. However, the Lords can exercise their political power to try and force the Commons to back down, because if they do delay a bill for a year, it's bound to attract media coverage. This happened in 2015, when then-Chancellor George Osborne tried to push through tax credit cuts, but the Lords decided to block it, and thanks to the ensuing media storm, Osborne quickly backed down on the policy. There's an obvious democratic tension here though. It's an unelected chamber frustrating the will of the elected chamber. In order to mitigate this, the Lords are bound by the Salisbury Convention, which dictates that they can't block any legislation that previously appeared in the governing party's manifesto. As well as scrutinising legislation, the Lords have select committees, which produce reports.
So let me get this, let me see if I can understand this. So basically, if the majority party in the House of Commons agrees to certain legislation, then the Lords cannot block that, because technically that is the greatest will of the people, because the majority in the House of Commons were the ones that were voted in by the majority of the people. Okay, I think that's what they're saying.
Reports and advice on specific areas. There are 6 permanent select committees in the Lords, and these are the European Union Committee, the Science and Technology Committee, the Communications Committee, the Constitution Committee, the Economic Affairs Committee, and the International Relations Committee.
Is the European Union Committee still one of the committees? Because I think this video was 2020, so when did Brexit happen? But that's if the UK has left the European Union, I'm wondering, you know, if this is still a part of, you know, one of the committees.
In addition to this, there are also temporary so-called ad hoc committees, which are formed in response to contemporary issues. Until 2005, there was also a 7th permanent committee, called the Appellate Court, which was essentially the highest court in the UK, composed of so-called law lords. Again, this led to a bit of democratic tension, because the old system meant that the most powerful element of the judiciary was contained within the legislature. So, in 2005, to disentangle the judiciary and the legislature, the Constitutional Reform Act replaced the Appellate Committee with the Supreme Court, and created an independent commission for judicial appointments, called the...
So, the Supreme Court in the UK is actually a part of the House of Lords? Is that what he's saying here? That's what it sounds like. Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what it sounds like he's saying here, is that the Supreme Court is now a part of the House of Lords. That's interesting.
the Judicial Appointments Commission. Technically, Lords can also hold government positions, but this practice has become less common because, well, it's not particularly democratic to have an unelected politician running a government department. So that's the Lords. At first glance, it makes no sense, having an unelected chamber with hereditary politicians in the UK in the 21st century. But before you dismiss it out of hand, it does have some advantages over the House of Commons. The Commons has an unfortunate selection bias. As everyone knows, most normal people don't want to be MPs. Having a chamber full of people who never set out to be politicians, but are merely there due to the virtue of their talent and expertise, and who aren't constantly afraid of the electorate, seems to have served the UK well thus far, even if it isn't particularly democratic.
Wow, is this the house that the House of Lords are in? The chamber. That's beautiful. How old is that? That looks amazing. Some beautiful artwork on the walls.
Anyway, if you'd like us to do another video on the future of the House of Lords, whether it has a place in the UK's future, then, well, the patrons have already asked for it, so it's going to be happening. So if you want to see that video when it's released, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when it comes out.
All right, guys. That explained quite a bit about who the House of Lords are. That was by a channel called TLDR News, I believe it is. I'll put the link to this video in the description. But so basically, the House of Lords aren't elected like I thought they weren't. And it's interesting. Do most of the people in the UK like the House of Lords, or would they rather have an elected Senate? I can kind of see the benefits in both ways. Just looking at it, these people in the House of Lords don't have to go through an election process, and therefore, they're kind of, a lot of the politicians in America, for example, and probably politicians that are MPs in Britain, when they basically are trying to be elected, they say a bunch of nice things that people want to hear, but they really aren't, telling people the truth about what they really believe. And when they get into office, they change the way they vote and whatnot. And it sounds like the House of Lords wouldn't quite have that problem, because they're not elected. They don't have to, they're not going to kind of sugarcoat who they really are and what they think. And then the fact that they have, a lot of different people have a lot of experience in different fields. I can see how that would help in regards to making better laws. Now, I'm sure there are many negatives there. I'm sure people would like to have the ability to elect these people too. But just off the surface, I can kind of see pros and cons. I know in America, for example, it's like, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but from what it seems, 90% of our politicians were lawyers. There's nobody with, experience in business, not that many doctors, not that many, professionals from all across many different fields, which I believe was the original intent of the founders of America, at least. But that is kind of doesn't happen anymore for some reason. But I thought this was interesting. I think I still don't quite understand everything about this. I'll probably go back and rewatch this video to try to understand it a little bit more. But maybe I'll look into some other videos on the House of Lords in the future. And of course, I need to check out the House of Commons as well. But otherwise, I believe that I kind of understand a little bit more about this. One thing that's interesting to me, was the fact that it sounds like, guys, I may be mistaken on this, what I'm understanding here, but it sounds like the Supreme Court is part of the House of Lords. Here we have a Supreme Court that, is, the president elects, or puts someone up to become a Supreme Court, puts their name up to the Senate, and the Senate, debates it and decides if they're going to approve or deny that, nominee. And then, there's 9 Supreme Court justices. How many Supreme Court justices does the UK have? And am I correct in what I thought they said here, that the Supreme Court is a part of the House of Lords? Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please click that like button, Share your comments in the comments section, any suggestions you might have, or corrections about this video maybe. And also, please don't forget to subscribe to continue to follow me on my journey to discover my British and Irish ancestry. Until next time, guys, peace.